It started with a letter, just like most HOA problems do. A neatly typed, overly polite notice slipped into my mailbox one morning, printed on glossy paper with the logo of the Silver Ridge Homeowners Association. The letter congratulated me on being part of their growing lakeside community and invited me to attend their next board meeting. That would have been fine, except I wasn't part of their community. I never signed anything, never bought a house there, and the lake they were talking about wasn't a community lake. It was my private reservoir, built decades ago by my grandfather, with a dam we constructed to irrigate our farmland. The water was ours, the land beneath it was ours, and I had the original deed and water rights to prove it. I remember reading the letter and laughing out loud, thinking it was just a mix-up. But I should be known better. HOAs never make simple mistakes, they make bold assumptions. A few days later, I drove down to where the new subdivision had been sprouting up over the past year. The place looked almost finished, rows of identical beige houses, neat lawns that hadn't even had time to grow properly, and a sign at the entrance that read Silver Ridge Lakeside Community. That last part made me grit my teeth. Lakeside. The lake was my reservoir. I parked my truck and walked down to the water's edge, where I saw a group of people in business clothes and orange safety vests talking near the dock. They looked up as I approached, and one of them, a woman with sunglasses perched on her head, walked over and extended her hand. "You must be one of the new residents," she said cheerfully. I shook my head. "Nope. I'm the guy who owns the lake." Her smile faltered. "I'm sorry, what?" she asked. "This is the Silver Ridge Community Lake. It's part of the HOA property." I pointed out toward the dam on the far end of the water. "That dam built by my grandfather in 1963. This lake filled from my water rights. And the land beneath your dock still under my name." She gave me that polite but condescending smile HOAs are famous for. "I think you're mistaken," she said sweetly. "The HOA purchased all the land within the development boundary last year. The lake is included in that." I laughed, shaking my head. "You bought part of the field that borders my property. The lake and everything under it were never for sale. You should probably check the county records before you go claiming it." She pursed her lips, clearly not used to being told no. "Well," she said finally, "the community will continue to use the lake for recreation, and if there's a dispute, you can take it up with our legal team." That was when I knew exactly what kind of fight I was walking into. I went home, dug out every document I had: deeds, water rights certificates, even old blueprints from when the dam was built, and had my lawyer, Mason, make certified copies. He was an old friend who'd helped me handle land issues before, and when he saw the letter from the HOA, he chuckled. "They have no idea what kind of trouble they're in," he said. "You've got water rights. That means the lake isn't just yours, it's legally protected. They can't touch it without your consent." We sent a formal notice to the HOA the following week, politely but firmly stating that the reservoir was private property, that they were trespassing, and that any attempt to use or claim the water would result in legal action. A few days later, I received a response that could come straight out of a bad sitcom. It was full of legal jargon and veiled threats, accusing me of interfering with community resources and denying residents access to shared property. They even claimed my dam was a potential safety hazard and said they would inspect and maintain it as part of their responsibilities. That one really made me laugh. The idea of HOA volunteers maintaining a dam was like letting kids perform surgery. A week after that, I came home to find new community rules signs posted along the road near the water, rules about fishing permits, boat usage, and swimming hours. My lake. My dam. my rules, and yet they were acting like it was theirs. I tore down one of the signs and tossed it in the back of my truck. Later that evening, I drove over to their board meeting, held in the shiny new clubhouse overlooking the lake. The place was full of smug-looking board members sipping coffee and flipping through binders. The woman with sunglasses, whose name I'd learned was Patricia, was at the front. She saw me walk in and her expression tightened. "Mr. Carter," she said coolly, "I hope you're here to work this out civilly." I smiled. "I'm here to remind you that you're swimming in my backyard." There were a few nervous laughs from the homeowners, but Patricia didn't smile. She started talking about community rights and shared environmental management. I interrupted her politely. "Show me one document, just one that says you own this lake." She hesitated, flipping through her binder. "Well, we have maps from the developer." She started, but I cut her off. "Maps aren't deeds. And your developer's surveyor drew the boundary wrong. The lake's outside your legal perimeter. It's not yours, and you've got no claim to it." She tried to stay composed, but her voice was sharper now. "This community relies on that lake for its property value. If you restrict access, you'll hurt everyone here." I shrugged. "Should be thought about that before building your dream homes around something you don't own." By the end of the meeting, the tension was thick enough to cut. I left before they voted on whatever fantasy resolution they were drafting, but I already knew they wouldn't back off easily. Sure enough, the next week I caught kids swimming in the lake, boats tied to the new dock, and even a community picnic sign posted near the water. They weren't just ignoring me, they were testing me. Mason advised patience. "Let them dig their hole," he said. "Every picture, every trespass, every event, they're strengthening your case." So that's what I did. I started taking photos. Every weekend, I'd drive out there with a camera, capturing proof of their encroachment. By early summer, the HOA had gone so far as to landscape part of the shoreline, planting decorative reeds and putting up benches. They even installed a fountain in the middle of the lake, powered by a generator that they ran across my property. That was the last straw. I walked up to the edge of the water one afternoon and watched the fountain spray mist into the air, glinting in the sunlight. It was almost beautiful if it hadn't been the most arrogant thing I'd ever seen. They had taken my family's land, my water, and my work, and treated it like their playground. I looked up at the dam in the distance. It stood tall and solid, just as my grandfather had built it. The water level was high, the spillway full. I hadn't adjusted it in months. As I watched the fountain churn in the middle of the lake, a thought crossed my mind, not an angry one, but a simple, factual one. The HOA could keep pretending all they wanted. But they didn't own the dam. They didn't control the flow. And one day, when the time was right, they were going to learn exactly what that meant. The summer stretched on, hot and dry, and every week the HOA pushed a little further. They treated the lake like their personal centerpiece, holding parties on the shore, setting up community fishing days, and even renting out kayaks for residents. Every time I drove by, it was like watching someone throw a celebration in your own living room while pretending you didn't exist. At first, I tried to stay calm. My lawyer Mason told me to be patient, to let them build their case against themselves. But patience only lasts so long when arrogance keeps slapping you in the face. The turning point came one afternoon when I saw bulldozers rolling down toward the flat land below the dam. They weren't just using the lake anymore, they were expanding. I parked my truck and walked down the dirt path to where a few men in hard hats were marking the ground with orange spray paint. A new sign stood nearby, freshly planted in the soil, future site of Silver Ridge Phase 2 luxury homes by Brookview Development. My stomach dropped. They were building more houses, and worse, the new section was directly below the dam. The same dam that fed the entire lake, the one they had been pretending to own. I approached one of the workers and asked who was in charge. He pointed me toward a man in a white shirt and a construction hat. The man looked irritated when I introduced myself. "Yeah," he said, squinting at me. "Can I help you?" I told him I was the landowner of this property, I said, gesturing toward the dam and the stretch of land below it. "You're standing on my land, and you're about to build on a floodplain that I control." He smirked, clearly not taking me seriously. "The HOA already cleared this with the county," he said. "We've got permits." I told him flatly, "Your permits mean nothing on land you don't own." That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the maps Mason had printed for me. The county line was clear as day. Everything below the dam, including the new construction site, was within my property boundary. I'd warned them once, and they ignored me. Now, they were building in the most dangerous spot possible, right where the runoff from the dam would flow if the gates were ever opened fully. I remembered the stories my grandfather told me when we built it, how powerful the water could be, how careful we had to be when adjusting the gates. The HOA had no idea what they were dealing with. They saw a pretty lake, not the structure that held it back. Within a few weeks, the construction was in full swing. Heavy machinery tore into the earth below the dam, digging foundations, laying pipes, pouring concrete. Trucks rumbled up and down the road from dawn till dusk. I stayed away for the most part, but I couldn't resist checking in occasionally. The developers had no idea the ground they were working on was privately owned. Or maybe they did and just didn't care. Either way, they were gambling with something they didn't understand. The sight made me uneasy, not because I was worried about losing land, but because I knew how fragile that balance was. The dam wasn't unsafe, but it wasn't designed to have 35 homes sitting directly beneath it either. I tried again to warn them. I sent another letter through Mason, this time not just to the HOA but directly to the developers. It included the property deed, the water rights certificate, and a clear statement that any construction beneath the dam was on private property. The response came a week later, written in the same smug tone I was getting used to. They claimed my boundaries were under dispute and that until the issue was resolved, construction would continue. That was when I realized they weren't just ignorant, they were arrogant. They thought I was bluffing. They thought no one would dare challenge a development backed by money and lawyers. By early autumn, the new homes were nearly complete. 35 houses, all identical, all sitting like ducks in a row at the foot of the dam. Families were already moving into the first few. Children played in the yards, sprinklers ran in the mornings, and the HOA proudly announced their lakeside expansion in their newsletter. I still got copies of those, somehow. It was almost funny how they bragged about their natural water feature and community reservoir. Every time I read those words, my patience wore thinner. I had tried to warn them. I had tried to play nice. But they were pushing me toward a line I didn't want to cross. One afternoon, as the sun was setting, I took a drive up to the top of the dam. It was quiet up there, the only sound coming from the steady trickle of water flowing through the spillway. The lake glowed orange and gold in the fading light, calm and beautiful. From where I stood, I could see the entire development below me, rows of shiny new roofs, driveways, cars parked neatly in front. It was a picture-perfect community, built on a lie. I thought about how confident Patricia had been at that first meeting, telling me I didn't own the lake. I wondered if she even knew that her phase 2 sat directly on my land. Probably not. Or maybe she just didn't care, as long as the HOA fees kept coming in. Mason called me that night. "You've got them where you want them," he said. "We've got enough documentation to make this a nightmare for them. But it's your call when to act." I told him I wasn't ready yet. "Let them finish," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "You sure?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "The bigger they build, the harder they'll fall." Over the next few weeks, I watched as they added the final touches: streetlights, landscaping, even a new playground near the bottom of the hill. It was surreal, seeing so much effort poured into something that was technically mine. I took photos every day, sometimes from the road, sometimes from the dam. Nobody seemed to notice me. They probably thought I was just another curious local. If only they knew. Then came the moment that told me everything I needed to know about how careless they'd become. One morning, I found a maintenance crew climbing over the dam itself. They were in HOA uniforms, carrying weed trimmers and shovels. They were trimming grass along the spillway on my side of the property. I walked up to them and asked what they were doing. One of them, a young guy who looked barely 20, said, "Just cleaning up, sir. HOA wants everything tidy for the fall festival." I looked past him and saw Patricia standing at the base of the dam, clipboard in hand, directing them. When she saw me, her face tightened, but she didn't back down. "We're maintaining community property," she called up. I shook my head slowly. "You're standing on private property," I said. "And one of these days, you're going to regret that." She didn't respond. Just turned away and started barking orders at her crew. I stood there for a long time, watching them work, feeling something shift inside me. That was the moment I stopped trying to reason with them. The HOA had built 35 homes on my land, below my dam, and ignored every warning I'd given. They thought they were untouchable. But water doesn't care about arrogance. Water goes where it's allowed to go. And I was the only one with the power to decide where that was. It was a cold, gray morning when I finally decided enough was enough. The air was heavy, the kind of damp stillness that comes before a storm, and the lake sat mirror still behind the dam. For weeks, I had watched the HOA and their new residents treat my property like a public park, ignoring every warning, every letter, and every legal notice. 35 homes sat directly below the dam now, their rooftops lined up neatly like chess pieces, the roads freshly paved and the driveways filled with cars. It was a picture of success, a monument to their arrogance. But beneath all that suburban calm was a truth they refused to see: they had built their perfect neighborhood on borrowed ground. My ground. And I still held the key that could change everything. That morning, I took my time. I made coffee, fed the dog, and sat at my kitchen table flipping through the thick folder Mason had prepared for court. The lawsuit was ready, airtight, with every map, deed, and survey marked in black and white. The HOA and the developers were going to face the consequences soon enough, but something in me had shifted. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something colder, calmer. I looked out the window toward the dam and saw mist curling off the surface of the lake. It was beautiful, but it was also a reminder of the power waiting behind that concrete wall. My grandfather had built it strong enough to hold back thousands of gallons of water, and I had kept it in perfect condition ever since. The spillway gates were old but solid, designed to be opened manually in emergencies. For decades, I'd never needed to. But that day, I decided it was time to remind them who owned the water they took for granted. I drove up to the dam just after sunrise. The gravel crunched under my tires, and the early fog clung to the ground like a blanket. When I stepped out of the truck, the chill hit me, sharp and bracing. I walked slowly to the control gate, running my hand along the railing. The metal was cold beneath my fingers. Below, I could see the entire neighborhood spread out like a miniature model, perfect lawns, driveways, even a few people out walking dogs. They had no idea I was up there, and maybe that was for the best. I wasn't planning to destroy anything, I just wanted to make a point. The dam had an overflow system that allowed excess water to run through the spillway and into the stream below. Opening it a bit would release the built-up pressure from recent rains and show them exactly what community property meant when the land didn't belong to them. I pulled the lever slowly, just enough to hear the old machinery groan to life. Water began to surge through the lower gates, rushing into the channel that wound its way toward the subdivision. Within minutes, the calm surface of the lake rippled, then churned. I stood there watching, not with malice, but with a sense of inevitability. Gravity was a law no HOA could rewrite. The sound of the water grew louder, echoing off the trees. It wasn't destructive, just powerful, commanding, undeniable. By the time I locked the gate and stepped back, a steady torrent was flowing downstream. At first, nothing happened. The neighborhood looked the same from up top, quiet and pristine. But then I saw movement, people gathering near the bottom of the hill, pointing toward the creek that ran along the backyards. It was swelling fast, spilling over its banks and soaking into the perfectly manicured lawns. Sprinklers shut off, dogs barked, and homeowners started coming outside, confused and shouting. I could almost hear them from where I stood. It wasn't a flood, not yet, but it was enough to get their attention. Enough to make them realize they weren't in control. I watched for a while longer, then drove down the hill toward the commotion. By the time I reached the edge of the development, a small crowd had gathered. Patricia was there, still clutching that same clipboard, barking orders like she was commanding a ship taking on water. When she saw me, her expression shifted from frustration to outrage. "What did you do?" she demanded, marching toward me. "You can't just open the dam. You're endangering people's homes." I leaned against my truck, keeping my voice calm. "My dam," I said. "My water. My land. You built below it without permission, remember?" She looked furious. "We have rights to use the lake," she shouted. I shook my head slowly. "You have wishes, Patricia. Not rights. Big difference." The water kept flowing, a steady, roaring reminder that nature doesn't bend to paperwork. The runoff carved small channels through their new landscaping, carrying mulch and decorative gravel down the street. Some of the homeowners were yelling now, trying to pile sandbags along the edges of their lawns. I didn't feel proud, exactly, but I didn't feel guilty either. They had been warned. Multiple times. And still, they acted like they owned the world. Maybe now they'd start reading deeds before claiming land that wasn't theirs. A sheriff's deputy showed up not long after, lights flashing. He recognized me immediately. We'd spoken before about the property dispute. "Morning, Mr. Carter," he said cautiously. "You want to tell me what's going on here?" I explained everything clearly: the legal ownership, the HOA's trespassing, and the dam maintenance I was performing. I handed him the paperwork Mason had prepared, showing my exclusive water rights. He looked through it, nodded, and sighed. "You're within your rights," he said quietly. Patricia overheard and nearly lost her composure. "You can't be serious." she screamed. He's flooding our neighborhood. The deputy looked at her, then back at me. Ma'am, technically this runoff is from his property. If it's causing an issue, you'll need to take it up with a civil court. I almost felt bad for the deputy. He was just doing his job, but part of me enjoyed watching the HOA president realize she had no power here. The flow slowed by late afternoon, and the water eventually receded, leaving behind muddy lawns and soggy pride. No one's home was damaged, but the message was clear. The next day, Mason called to tell me that the HOA had finally filed a formal complaint. I told him good, that meant they were taking the bait. The case would force the county to review the ownership records, and once they did, there'd be no denying who the real landowner was. Within a week, the HOA's claim collapsed. The county reissued the property lines, confirming that the lake, the dam, and the land beneath all 35 houses belonged to me. When the ruling came down, I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. I just drove back up to the dam one last time, parked the truck, and stood there watching the sunset reflect off the lake. The water was calm again, golden light shimmering across its surface. Down below, the neighborhood looked peaceful, as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. They would remember. They would tell stories about the day the man who didn't belong opened the dam and made them face the truth. As I stood there, the wind picked up, rustling the reeds by the shore. I thought about my grandfather again, how he built this dam to sustain our land, not to decorate someone else's dream. The HOA had taken what wasn't theirs, twisted it into a selling point, and called it progress. But the land doesn't forget who it belongs to. It always remembers. I took one last look at the houses below, then at the lever that controlled the dam. I locked it, pocketed the key, and smiled faintly. They had learned their lesson. You can build all the homes you want, but you can't build on someone else's ground and expect it to hold forever.